James Comey, thanks for speaking with us again.
It's great to be with you, Jared, as always.
I last spoke with you in early October, and I was thinking it's incredible how much has changed between early October and now, and I don't even live in your shoes. I mean, what does that feel like to have all of this coming down the pike?
Yeah, they're big enough for you to live in, but it's bizarre, and so sometimes I'm able to just push it away because it seems so otherworldly, but very strange and difficult time we live in now.
Well, a week from today, you've been subpoenaed to testify before the House Judiciary Committee, along with Loretta Lynch. It is described as a closed-door session, which you've already described. You're resisting. Why?
I'm in favor of oversight, so I think it's terrific whenever Congress wants to examine the executive branch, but they have to do it responsibly. And I'm not a fan of selective leaking and distortion. I think there ought to be transparency, there ought to be openness. So I'd like to have a hearing, and I'll answer all questions in the light. I just don't like this behind closed doors business.
And I should mention these are questions about the FBI's investigation of the Clinton emails, about the Trump campaign and its involvement with Russia. You mentioned a couple of things there, including leaking. What are you afraid is going to happen if you do a closed-door session?
Well, this investigation, so-called by those two committees, has involved a series of behind-closed-doors interviews of FBI people, followed immediately by leaks and distortions of people who were in the room for a supposedly closed-door session. That's no way to conduct oversight. That's not legitimate use of the oversight authority. So I think the best antidote to that kind of distortion is let's have sunshine. Ask me questions and let all of America watch.
What do you think the intent of this hearing is?
I don't know. I hope it is legitimate oversight of the executive branch. I worry from the conduct we've seen that it's more about trying to create some false narrative that the FBI was on, let me get it right, on Team Clinton and against Team Trump or something like that.
I mean, and the Democrats have spoken out and consider this as a means by which to stir up some controversy. Do you think there's validity there, too?
I don't know. I mean, there's always controversy when politicians are involved, but my interest is in making sure that people get a full and fair view of the facts. Very hard to do that in the dark. Impossible to do it when people are leaving the dark and saying stuff that ain't true about what happened in the dark. So let's have sunshine.
And I mentioned controversy, which of course there always is, but they also mentioned conspiracy theory. I mean, has it gotten that dark?
There's plenty of conspiracy theorists in the United States. I think it's a thing to which human beings are naturally drawn. There seems to be a lot of folks drawn to those things now. And people who are trapped in a conspiracy theory aren't looking for facts because all facts confirm a conspiracy theory. If you deny it, of course, you're denying it. That confirms my theory. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time worrying about what conspiracy theorists might think.
I'm sure you saw Trey Gowdy's comments yesterday on Face the Nation. Of course, he's not chairing the Judiciary Committee, but he agreed with you, to his own surprise, said that that he believed that there could be leaks. However, he wants a closed-door session, but to have it videotaped and that released after. Is that an amenable solution to this?
It's not something I want to respond to now. My legal team is working through to give me advice on just what my options are. I saw what he said. I was gratified that he acknowledges the very problem that I'm talking about. And he's the chair of one of the two committees that wants to question me. So that's a positive first step. Now I'd like to step into the daylight and have the hearing in public.
You just mentioned your attorneys, and I had this question too. It seems I couldn't get answers today. Are you compelled to testify? Do you have to show up in Washington next week?
Well, that's a good question. I suppose one that lawyers have to answer. I respect the process. I always respect subpoenas, so I would never just ignore a subpoena. If I were going to respond in some way, I'd respond legally. I wouldn't just blow it off.
Before I move off this, another element that Trey Gowdy introduced yesterday was that all of your interviews in this capacity around this realm have been behind closed doors. He asks, and other people have asked, why now? Why now bring it out into the light?
He must have forgotten the 10 hours I spent being asked questions by his committee and the Judiciary Committee about this same subject in 2016. I have answered endless questions, almost all of them in the sunshine and not in a private interview. As I mentioned at the outset, I mean, this is a pretty extraordinary time to be you. You have the president last week who it was released, said, or conversations released saying that he wanted you prosecuted. He said in the past that there should be a special counsel to investigate you. It looks like with the Democrats winning the House that you might be brought back for a subpoena again. I mean, how do you live in this wave? I'm the same ordinary knucklehead I've always been. I do two things. I
I'm a little bit numb to the president's threats and tweets because there's nothing there. There's nothing to investigate me for. I didn't disclose classified information ever, which is why there never was an investigation. But then I stopped myself because it's wrong for me or anybody else to become numb to the President of the United States announcing that a private citizen should be prosecuted. And I say that slowly because I hope Republicans listen to it and realize that if a Democrat were president and did that, their heads would explode. So my question is, why are your heads not exploding now? This is about the rule of law, which I think is something all of us, without regard to party, care deeply about. Why are they caring about it episodically? That troubles me a lot.
Well, we've seen where the president's words have had effect. A lot of actions that have happened around this country have been tied back to his language in particular and his notions in particular. Has that rained down on you, some of the hate?
Well, there's plenty of haters out there. In my experience, more people who are supportive than are haters. There's nothing I can do about that. I worry very much about the president's words because another thing Republicans, I thought, believed is that the character and quality of the president matters enormously because that model shapes how people act. Not just troubled people at the margins, but kids in high school, people starting out in careers, they look to that leadership model. And what they're seeing now is not the kind of leadership that we want.
You had an op-ed recently in the New York Times, and the capacity in which I've come to speak with you is here at the Boston Speaker Series. You've been speaking around the country. Knowing what you know, knowing what you just described about what we're facing and what a lot of people are trying to process in the presidency and this vitriol in this country, you see hope.
Oh, I do. I'm absolutely optimistic. We are going to be okay. The rhythm of history assures me that we are. The history of America is progress, regression, progress. We always end up above where we were a few years earlier. That's going to happen again. And I can feel it already. That more people voted in this midterm election than in any election since Watergate is a sign that the American people are stirring. They handed one of the two houses of Congress to the opposition party. That's great because that means the design of the founders is going to work. These are really hopeful signs, and I'm not a fool falling in love with my aspirations. I see this around the country, and it's consistent with our history. We are going to be okay.
What about your former FBI? I mean, there have been comments about your successor as well. Do you worry at all about the viability of that institution in the near term?
I don't. I think it's being hurt in the near term by the president's attacks, and that worries me at the margins where people have to believe FBI agents when they say they found something or they say we'll protect you. So there's danger there, but in the long run, that institution is stronger. Its values are stronger than any president who's attacking the rule of law. No president serves long enough to damage the fundamental values of America, and those are reflected in the FBI.
Since I spoke with you, we have a new Attorney General, at least an acting one, in Matthew Whitaker. I know he joined Jeff Sessions' team after your firing, but what do you know of him?
He was the U.S. Attorney when I was the Deputy Attorney General. He was the U.S. Attorney in southern Iowa, so I know him casually.
Did you have a sense about whether he should be serving as acting Attorney General? Many people have questioned even the legality of it.
I think there's a serious legal question. I don't know the answer. I'm glad to see it's going to be adjudicated in the courts. I think there's a more serious question, and that is he having the career ethics officials at the Department of Justice examine his past and then offer him a written opinion as to whether he should be involved in things like the Muller investigation? I sure hope he is, because that's the only way to be a responsible leader of that institution, but I don't know that to be the case.
Well, we've seen some of the comments that he made prior to becoming acting Attorney General about his thoughts on the Mueller investigation, that it shouldn't be happening, that you should have been fired. To what extent do you think he can derail the special investigation?
I think it's a worry, but to my mind, not a serious worry. The institution is too strong, and he, frankly, is not strong enough to have that kind of impact. And look, he may not be the sharpest knife in our drawer, but he can see his future and knows that if he acted in an extra-legal way, he will go down in history for the wrong reasons, and I'm sure he doesn't want that.
How do you think he's not strong enough to do that?
Well, I just don't think he has the throw weight, both by virtue of his experience, his intellect, and his time in seat, to be able to shape the institution in that way.
you firmly believe, or how firmly do you believe, that the president's interaction with you amounted to obstruction of justice? And I ask this because this is the conversation that you had with your friend, who then passed it on to the New York Times, and it became the impetus for Robert Mueller's investigation.
I don't know, is the honest answer. I'm someone with a view on part of that. Obviously, I was the person to whom the president was speaking when he told me to drop the Flynn investigation. But to make an evaluation about whether that's obstruction of justice requires a view of the evidence that I just don't have.
I asked you this before, and I know there's only so much that you can answer, but we're all reading a lot of the same things. What's your assessment of how the Mueller investigation stands right now, and when we'll begin to see results?
I don't know. I know for sure it's being done professionally and at tremendous speed, considering how much they've produced in just about a year and a half now. It's remarkable. If I had to guess, which is just a guess, I'd guess they're in the fourth quarter. Working their way up towards the top of an organization is the way you normally do an investigation. I saw in the media they're at a point where they're trying to get the president to cooperate with them. That's another sign. You typically do that at the end of an investigation. So I'm guessing we're near the end, but because it's been done so professionally, I honestly don't know.
How much does it impact the investigation that the president refused a sit-down, face-to-face interview, but instead appears to be submitting written answers to the Mueller questions?
Only the investigators can answer that. It's certainly strange that the chief officer of the executive branch of the United States government wouldn't fully cooperate with an investigation being conducted by the Department of Justice, but we live in strange times. I'm hopeful that they can get a view of the facts without that cooperation, but it's often difficult. You want to talk to the subject of the investigation and say, hey, what about this? Should we think about this in that way or this way? And it's useful to getting to the truth. But I can't answer the ultimate question because I don't sit on that team.
Moving on to the subject of emails, it came up again with Ivanka Trump's emails. How did you process that story, that she also, not unlike Hillary Clinton, was using her own personal email to conduct government transactions or business exchanges?
Yeah, once again reminded me that even the media doesn't remember what the Clinton email investigation was about. It wasn't about whether Hillary Clinton used a personal email system or Gmail. It was about how she handled classified information. That's what it's about. It's not a crime to use whatever Ivanka Trump used or even Hillary Clinton's server. And so I don't see any indication that Ivanka Trump was communicating about classified stuff. So I kind of pushed it to the side.
It made your own email use come back up. The New York Post reported about you recently and questioned your use of personal email to conduct government business. And they did wonder about the classified information and content because not all information was turned over via a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. Did you have any exchanges of classified information on your email?
No, never. I'm smiling because two things. First of all, yeah, when the FBI refuses to produce stuff, they state a basis for withholding it. They didn't withhold any of my stuff because it was classified, not an issue. They withheld a bunch of my stuff because it was sensitive. And the reason it's sensitive is, it won't surprise you that when my children had a school play, or we were going on vacation, or we were going to go to 11 o'clock church service instead of 8:30, I would use Gmail to email my security detail to tell them that, because that's not official government business. So thank goodness the FBI withheld all of that stuff about my family. That's the big scoop that the New York Post found.
Moving on, another thing that happened since I last spoke with you, Whitey Bulger was murdered. It's a story we obviously know very well here. I'm sure you know very well because the FBI spent a long time hunting him down. We know how he was murdered, but we still don't know the circumstances that led to his placement in that prison to be murdered. I mean, how did you process that? Something the FBI worked so hard on, and then the man is murdered as soon as he's transferred into this new prison.
Yeah, I processed it by saying if I were running the Department of Justice, I would want a big team of experts on that right away to figure out who did it, how did it happen, and where were the drops along the way. It's terrible. When anyone is killed in your custody, you want to learn from it. And I got to assume that's going on now.
I wonder about that personally because we haven't seen a lot of accountability from that prison. They've had other murders there. The prison system, in my years of coverage, has been notoriously quiet about these types of things. I mean, can we expect that there will be a full accounting for what happened?
I would bet you can. It's because it's in the hands of the Inspector General for the Department of Justice, a very competent and aggressive group of people. and I'm sure they're going to dig into it in a great way. Now, how much you can see publicly as against what the internal organization will see, I don't know. But there will be quality work done.
And finally, I just want to ask something more personal that you write about, and I haven't seen you talk a lot about publicly in your book, A Higher Loyalty, and that's something that happened to you as a teenager when you were held at gunpoint by the Ramsey rapist,
Yep.
who he later became to be known. I mean, it was a traumatic event. You and your brother held at gunpoint as teenagers. First of all, how much does that still stay with you, and did that really define who you would become, as I'm talking to the former director of the FBI?
It was a huge impact on me. High school senior, it wasn't just held at gunpoint. A serial rapist and robber kicked in my parents' front door one night and held my brother and me, had us lie down on my parents' bed, and I thought was about to execute us. And that changed me in a really important way. For the better, I think, as odd as that sounds. I became very empathetic towards victims, and I came to treasure sunsets and being alive as a high school senior, and that's unusual, and that was really good. I don't know whether it drove me to law enforcement. At least in my own story, I still wanted to be a doctor after that, but it had to have an influence on me and steer me more towards the justice system. But it's with me all the time. My brother and I call each other on the anniversary, October 28th, 41st anniversary this year, and it's present whenever I go visit. My dad still lives in the same house, and so whenever I visit, I see it in my head.
You've just talked about some of the more positive elements, how you use that to appreciate sunsets and whatnot, but how traumatizing was it for you?
Oh, it was really bad. I mean, I thought about it every night, that guy, for 5 years. Not most nights, every night for 5 years. And he lived in my head for a long time. And so, again, it was horrific. But what it did for me was I started to think about the women he had sexually assaulted. I wasn't physically harmed. And I thought about it every night for 5 years. Imagine the pain inflicted on one of the women that he physically assaulted. And so I chose to use it to learn from and to help me orient towards service in a better way. But yeah, it's a very big deal. Now, my wife's a therapist. I didn't know about trauma-based therapy, but accidentally, I used to tell the story repeatedly to friends, to family. My friends in college would have me tell it whenever the girls were getting ready to leave the party so that people would stay and listen. And telling it over and over again was actually healing for me that I can see now as an adult, because that's a big part of the way you treat trauma today, and accidentally it helped me in a great way.
Well, James Comey, it's a pleasure to speak with you again. We appreciate your time.
Great to be with you, Jared. Thank you.